A city sleeps soundly under a starry sky, unaware the mountain beside it has begun to move. In moments, a tide of earth and stone silences every street and home forever. This is not a scene from a film, but a real and repeated tragedy of history. Our journey uncovers 25 ancient landslides that did not just damage landscapes, they buried entire civilizations. These catastrophic events erased cultures from memory, leaving behind only whispers and ruins for us to decipher. You will discover the true stories of empires swallowed by the sea, cities lost beneath desert sands, and villages frozen in time under volcanic mud. How could a thriving port simply vanish beneath the waves? What legendary metropolis was hiding under a desert all along? We are about to become detectives, piecing together tales of unimaginable destruction and incredible rediscovery. Each story reveals the breathtaking power of nature and the fragile thread on which human achievement hangs. What forgotten world would you most want to see emerge from the earth? Our first stop takes us to the coast of ancient Greece, to a city whose fate was so dramatic it haunted the classical world for centuries. Hittite was a powerful and prosperous member of the Achaean League, famous for its sanctuary dedicated to Poseidon, god of the sea and earthquakes. Then, on a winter night in the year 373 before the Common Era, everything changed. The ground shook with a violence no one had ever known. As the historian Diodorus Siculus recorded, the earthquake was so immense it toppled every building, but the horror did not end with the tremors. The convulsing land triggered a catastrophic submarine landslide along the coast. The earth beneath Hittite literally liquefied, and the entire city, its temples, its statues, and its people slid into the dark waters of the Corinthian Gulf. To compound the tragedy, a giant tsunami rushed in to fill the void, ensuring that nothing and no one remained. By dawn, Hittite was simply gone, replaced by a silent, salty sea. For ancient writers, this was not merely a natural disaster, it was a divine punishment. They spoke of a strange omen that preceded the catastrophe, a column of fire seen in the sky, and a mass exodus of small animals from the coast days before, as if nature itself was fleeing. Most haunting was the reported prophecy that the city would be lost when the statue of Poseidon became invisible, a riddle only understood in hindsight when the god's own sanctuary was dragged beneath the waves. Hittite became the ultimate cautionary tale, a story told and retold about the wrath of the gods and the precariousness of human fortune. For nearly 2,000 years, Hittite was a ghost, a legend debated by scholars. Then, in the late 20th century, archaeologists finally pinpointed its grave. They discovered the city's ruins not far offshore, buried under layers of silt and clay, preserved in the same watery tomb that claimed it. Finding Hittite confirmed the ancient accounts with chilling accuracy, transforming myth into geological history. It stands as a stark, early example of how a single, violent movement of the earth can erase a civilization from the map, leaving only stories and a profound sense of awe at nature's power. This pattern of sudden, total burial would repeat itself across the globe, in forms even more devastating than a collapsing coastline. From the drowned streets of Hittite, we travel east to a legend baked into the very heart of the Arabian desert. For centuries, Bedouin storytellers and European explorers whispered of a magnificent city of towering pillars and immense wealth, a place so wicked it was punished by God and swallowed whole by the sands. They called it Ubar, the Atlantis of the sands. This was no ordinary settlement. It was the command center of the ancient frankincense trade, a commodity once as precious as gold. Caravans laden with fragrant resin from distant trees would converge here, making its rulers unimaginably wealthy. Yet, by the dawn of the Common Era, Ubar had vanished from all maps, existing only as a moral fable of greed and divine retribution. What force could possibly erase such a powerful hub from the face of the earth? The answer lay not in an angry deity, but but in the very ground the city was built upon. Ubar's incredible wealth was its fatal flaw. The city was constructed above a massive network of limestone caverns, natural reservoirs that trapped precious rainwater in the brutally arid desert. For generations, these underground chambers provided life, allowing Ubar to flourish as an oasis in an ocean of sand. But the city's growth and the constant traffic of heavy trade caravans likely stressed the fragile limestone roof. One day, the ground simply gave way. In a cataclysm far more sudden than gradual desertification, the caverns collapsed. The city above, its palaces and temples and bustling markets, plummeted into the gaping sinkhole. The desert, always waiting, rushed in to fill the void, burying Ubar under a shroud of sand in what might have been a single, terrifying event. This geological explanation transformed the myth into a plausible historical tragedy. The city wasn't merely abandoned, it was entombed. For modern archaeologists, finding a city lost in such a vast, empty landscape seemed impossible. That is, until technology offered a new kind of map. In the 1980s, researchers used satellite imagery and ground-penetrating radar to trace the faint, ancient paths of frankincense trade routes across the desert. These ghostly trails, invisible from the ground, all converged on one remote spot in modern-day Oman. Excavations there revealed the truth: a fortress city with walls over 2 meters thick, built around the rim of a massive sinkhole. Towers had fallen inward, and the ruins were filled with wind-blown sand, exactly as the old stories had described. The discovery of Ubar proved that some legends are grounded in terrifying geological reality. A civilization can be built on a foundation of literal hollow ground, and when that foundation fails, the earth itself becomes a tomb. This theme of cities falling into the earth would replay in even more dramatic fashion, not in a desert but in the lush volcanic highlands of the Americas. The fate of Ubar, swallowed by the desert, finds a haunting parallel in the watery depths of another great trading empire. For over 1,000 years, the city of Thonis Heracleion was little more than a myth, a name mentioned in ancient texts as a glorious Egyptian port where all ships from Greece had to dock before entering the Nile. Historians argued it must have been near Alexandria, but no trace of it could be found on land. The truth was far more dramatic. Thonis Heracleion was not lost on land, it was sleeping under the sea. This was not a slow sinking, but a sudden and violent geological collapse. Built on the unstable, waterlogged clay of the Nile Delta, the entire city was a masterpiece of engineering perched on a foundation of shifting mud. For centuries it thrived, a bustling gateway where Egyptian and Greek cultures met. Its grand temples dedicated to the god Ammon standing beside colossal statues of pharaohs. Then, around the 8th century of the Common Era, disaster struck. A powerful earthquake, likely centered in the Mediterranean, violently shook the region. The tremor liquefied the already unstable delta sediments. In a catastrophic event, the ground beneath Thonis Heracleion simply gave way. The earth moved in a massive underwater landslide, and the city, its temples, its docks, and its daily life slid off the continental shelf and into the deep waters of Aboukir Bay. The Mediterranean rushed in to claim it, burying the metropolis under meters of sand and silt. It vanished so completely that its very existence was questioned. The rediscovery of Thonis Heracleion is a story of modern archaeology meeting ancient catastrophe. In the year 2000, a team led by underwater archaeologist Frank Gaudio, using sophisticated side-scan sonar, detected strange, monumental shapes on the seafloor. Divers descended into the murky waters and were met with a sight frozen in time. They found a world in silent suspension, a ghost city preserved in a watery tomb. Colossal statues of a pharaoh and a queen, each over 5 meters tall, lay face down on the seabed as if gently laid to rest. A giant red granite stele, inscribed with a royal decree in both hieroglyphics and Greek, stood perfectly preserved. They discovered the remains of grand temples, stone anchors from ships, and even delicate gold jewelry, all untouched for over a millennium. These finds did more than confirm a legend, they rewrote history. Thonis Heracleion was not a minor port. It was the primary customs gateway and religious center for all Mediterranean trade with Egypt for centuries before Alexander the Great founded Alexandria. Its discovery provided tangible proof of the deep cultural and economic links between ancient Egypt and the Greek world, links that were literally buried by a single geological event. The city's fate is a stark reminder that the ground beneath our feet is not always solid, and that even the most powerful civilizations can be silenced in an instant by the movement of the earth. But what happens when the earth does not just slide or sink, but explodes with a fury that can darken the sky across continents? The silent, sunken world of Thonis Heracleion shows us water as a tomb, but in the mountainous heart of China, earth and stone performed a different kind of burial, one that reshaped an entire landscape and the lives within it. Deep in Sichuan province, the story of the Liangshan landslide is written not in sunken temples, but in the very contours of the land itself. This was not a single city falling, but a cataclysm of such immense scale it altered the course of a river and erased communities from memory. Sometime around 1700 before the Common Era, a massive section of a mountain in the Liangshan region simply let go. The cause was likely a powerful earthquake common in this seismically active zone. The resulting landslide was staggering, sending an estimated 2.5 billion cubic meters of rock and soil crashing into the narrow valley of the Jincha River. To put that in perspective, that is enough material to bury a modern metropolis under hundreds of meters of debris. The river, a powerful force in its own right, was no match for this sudden wall of earth. It was completely blocked, its waters pooling behind the new, unnatural dam. In a matter of days or weeks, a vast lake began to form, drowning the upstream valleys. Any villages or farms along those riverbanks were inundated, their inhabitants forced to flee as the waters rose silently and relentlessly. But for settlements located directly in the landslide's path, there was no warning and no escape. They were buried instantly under hundreds of meters of rubble, sealed away with a finality that even the sea could not match. The lake created by the landslide, known as a landslide-dammed lake, became a persistent feature on the landscape. It likely lasted for centuries, a placid body of water hiding a scene of utter devastation below. Over time, sediment from upstream rivers slowly filled this lake, eventually creating a flat, fertile plain atop the ancient debris, a new land born from destruction. This cycle is a recurring theme in China's dramatic topography. The country's mountainous regions, from the Tibetan Plateau to the steep gorges of the southwest, are a dynamic, unstable canvas. Earthquakes, heavy rains, and the sheer weight of geology trigger landslides with a frequency that has profoundly shaped human history. Villages were built on seemingly stable slopes, only to be wiped away in moments. Trade routes were severed, river valleys were rerouted, and new, isolated communities formed in the aftermath. The Liangshan event is a prehistoric example of a pattern that continues to this day, a reminder that in these landscapes the ground itself is a temporary arrangement. The lost villages of Liangshan remain buried, their names and stories long forgotten, absorbed back into the earth. Yet their fate echoes a universal truth for civilizations living in the shadow of mountains. The line between a thriving home and a mass grave can be as thin as a tremor in the rock. And sometimes the earth does not bury a civilization with a single, violent act, but through a slower, more insidious process, one grain of sand at a time. Sometimes the earth does not just shake, it screams. Around the year 1600 before the Common Era, the island of Thera, now known as Santorini, exploded with a force that may be unmatched in human history. The eruption was apocalyptic, a volcanic event so powerful it tore the island apart, sending cubic kilometers of rock and ash into the stratosphere and leaving behind the dramatic caldera we see today. But for the brilliant Minoan civilization on Crete, 110 kilometers to the south, the greatest danger was not the ash cloud or the earthquakes, it was what the volcano set in motion beneath the sea. The sheer violence of Thera's collapse is believed to have triggered an enormous submarine landslide. Imagine a vast shelf of the seabed, destabilized by the convulsions, suddenly giving way and sliding into the deep abyss of the Aegean. The displacement of such an immense volume of water had one inevitable, terrifying consequence: a tsunami. This was not a large wave, it was a towering wall of water moving at the speed of a jet aircraft, radiating out from Thera like a shockwave. Within perhaps 30 minutes, it reached the northern coast of Crete, the very heart of Minoan power. The archaeological evidence at coastal sites like Amnisos is stark and telling. Excavations revealed buildings with their seaward walls completely blown inward, as if struck by a colossal force from the ocean. Layers of sediment contain a chaotic mix of marine shells, pumice, and building debris, all churned together in a violent, watery deposit. At other Minoan ports, massive blocks of stone were ripped from their foundations and tossed inland. The tsunami did not just flood these cities, it scoured them, obliterating the fleet of ships that was the source of Minoan trade wealth and drowning the coastal agricultural plains in salt water. The catastrophe was a blow from which the sophisticated Minoan culture, a society of stunning art, advanced architecture, and peaceful commerce, never truly recovered. Their palaces, like Knossos, survived the initial wave, but the economic and social fabric of the civilization was torn apart. The loss of their navy and ports crippled their trade empire. The salination of farmland caused famine. In the power vacuum that followed, the Minoans became vulnerable, and within a few generations, their culture was absorbed by mainland Mycenaean Greeks. The exact timeline remains one of archaeology's hottest debates. Did the eruption and tsunami deliver a single, killing blow around 1600 before the Common Era? Or did it happen a century or so later, acting as a final, dramatic coup de grace to a civilization already in decline from other factors? The debate hinges on minute details in pottery styles and radiocarbon dates from olive branches buried in Thera's ash. Regardless of the precise year, the story written in the ruins is clear. The Minoans, for all their elegance and advancement, were no match for the chain reaction set off by a distant volcano, a sequence where fire triggered a slide, and that slide summoned a wave that changed the course of history. This demonstrates a profound truth: a civilization can be buried not by the event itself, but by the dominoes it falls. While the Minoan world was shattered by a distant volcano's fury, another eruption offered a far gentler form of oblivion, one that gifted the future with a perfect frozen moment. In the fertile Zapoteton Valley of what is now El Salvador, a Mayan farming community known as Cerén was going about its evening around the year 600 of the Common Era. There was no towering plume of fire, no earth-shattering boom from the nearby Loma Caldera volcano. Instead, the first warning was likely a low rumble and a strange hissing steam. The volcano had erupted not with lava, but with a phreatic blast, superheating groundwater and sending a torrent of ash-saturated mud racing down its slopes. This was a lahar, a volcanic landslide of searing slurry that moved with the speed and finality of wet concrete. It was not hot enough to burn, but it was relentless. Within moments, the village of Cerén was engulfed under 5 to 7 meters of this ashy cement, a blanket that smothered everything with astonishing gentleness. The preservation was so perfect, so instantaneous, that archaeologists have called Cerén the Pompeii of the Americas. But unlike Pompeii, where searing heat carbonized life, Cerén was preserved in cool, damp mud, capturing organic materials Pompeii could not. Here, the catastrophe was not destructive, it was a time capsule. The snapshot it provides is not of nobles and emperors, but of everyday people. In one kitchen, a meal of beans and squash was left uneaten on a grinding stone. In a storehouse, pots still held intact seeds of chili peppers and cocoa. A farmer's garden was fossilized mid-growth, with neat rows of maize, manioc, and agave plants still standing. We can see the thumbprints of the potter in the clay and the sleeping mats in the corner of a home, still indented from their last use. This level of detail reveals a society of sophisticated, comfortable farmers. They lived in well-built, thatched roof houses with separate areas for sleeping, cooking, and storage. They had community buildings, a temescal or sweat bath for ritual cleansing, and a shaman structure filled with sacred objects. Their agriculture was diverse and ingenious, a far cry from simple subsistence. The story of Cerén is uniquely profound because it was not a city of stone monuments, but a village of earth and thatch. Without this sudden, muddy burial, every trace of these homes, these gardens, these daily lives would have vanished into the tropical soil centuries ago. The lahar did not just bury a village, it saved a world. It allows us to walk in our minds through the doorway of a Mayan home on a completely ordinary evening, to smell the cooking fires and see the tools left on the floor, and to understand that history is not only written by kings, but also preserved in the abandoned supper of a fleeing family. This intimate preservation forces us to ask, what other countless ordinary worlds have been lost because the earth did not cover them with such perfect care? The gentle preservation of Cerén is a rare gift, but not all burials are so kind. Across the continent and centuries later, another civilization faced a more relentless geological threat, one that chipped away at their world piece by piece. In the high desert canyons of what is now Colorado, the ancestral Pueblones built their homes not on the ground, but in the very walls of the earth. Places like Cliff Palace and Balcony House at Mesa Verde are marvels of engineering, entire villages tucked into immense sandstone alcoves high above the canyon floor. These were not temporary shelters, but complex multi-story communities of stone masonry, built to last for generations. Their strategic position offered defense and shade, but it came with a hidden, constant danger. The cliff itself was slowly dying. Sandstone, for all its solid appearance, is a fragile rock. It forms in layers, and the constant cycles of freezing and thawing in the high desert work like a wedge. Water seeps into cracks, freezes and expands, then thaws, prying the rock apart over decades. This natural process, called frost wedging, creates a steady rain of rocks from the canyon rims. But sometimes the failure is not a pebble, but a piece of the sky. Major rockfalls and slope failures were a catastrophic reality for the cliff dwellers. Archaeologists have found clear evidence of these events. At some sites, you can see where entire sections of a dwelling were crushed by massive boulders that fell from the alcove roof. A room might be found with its walls smashed inward, pottery shattered beneath tons of stone. These were not just property damages, they were direct attacks on the community's safety and its very architecture. Imagine the sound in the silent canyon, a deep rumble followed by a crash that echoed for miles, then dust settling to reveal a part of your home and possibly your neighbors gone forever. Each major landslide or rockfall forced a difficult decision. The community could attempt to rebuild, clearing the rubble and constructing new rooms, but that meant living under a ceiling that had already proven unstable. Or they could abandon that particular alcove and move, perhaps to another cliff face nearby or deeper into the canyon system. This pattern of build, collapse, and relocate added a tremendous layer of stress to an already precarious existence. The ancestral Pueblones were masterful adapters, dealing with variable rainfall and resource management, but geological instability was a foe they could not predict or control. These landslides were more than just accidents, they were powerful environmental pressures compounding the others. When combined with prolonged drought in the late 13th century, which strained water and agricultural resources, the constant threat from the cliffs above may have been the final, convincing argument to leave. The magnificent stone cities of Mesa Verde were not abandoned in a single, dramatic exodus. but in a gradual retreat from a landscape that was becoming literally and figuratively crumbling. Their departure left behind silent alcoves and empty rooms, a testament not to a sudden catastrophe, but to a slow, grinding burial by the very walls they called home. This story of attrition raises a deeper question. What happens when the threat is not from the walls around you, but from the ground dissolving beneath your feet? The silent, crumbling cliffs of Mesa Verde represent a slow surrender to gravity, but in ancient China, the power of the earth was not just a threat to be managed, it was a tool to be wielded. Guarding the greatest secret of the ancient world required more than walls or soldiers. It required the landscape itself to become a silent sentinel. The tomb of Qin Shi Huang, China's first emperor, lies beneath a massive man-made mound in the shadow of Mount Lai. While the famous terracotta army stands guard some distance away, the emperor's actual burial chamber remains unopened, a decision rooted in respect and a very real fear of the traps described by the historian Sima Qian. He wrote of crossbows set to fire automatically, of rivers of shimmering mercury mimicking the seas of China, and of a final, devastating safeguard, the sealing of the tomb. After the burial ceremony was complete, the inner craftsmen and laborers were trapped inside, and then, the story goes, the outer passageways were closed. But what if the final seal was not just a stone door, but the mountain? The geography itself suggests a terrifying possibility. The tomb complex is built into the northern foothills of Mount Lai, an area of lowest soil, a fine, wind-blown sediment that is incredibly fertile but also notoriously unstable when wet. This landscape is prone to natural landslides, especially after heavy rains. The ancient engineers, masters of hydraulics and earthworks who built the emperor's entire necropolis, would have been acutely aware of this. Their monumental task included not just constructing the tomb, but protecting it for eternity. A primary threat would have been water erosion, exposing the hidden entrances, and of course, tomb robbers. Managing the slopes to control runoff and prevent natural collapses would have been a critical part of the site's maintenance, a form of ancient geological engineering. This leads to a chilling and plausible theory. What if, as the final act of the burial, the engineers did more than just close the doors? What if they deliberately destabilized the slopes above the primary access shafts? Using their knowledge of the soil, they could have channeled water to saturate key areas or removed strategic supports. The goal would not be to destroy the tomb, but to bury its doorways under a sudden, deliberate avalanche of earth and rock. A triggered landslide would accomplish several things with brutal efficiency. First, it would add an immense, natural layer of protection over the man-made seals, making any attempt to dig down a monumental and chaotic task. Second, it would erase all surface traces of the construction entrances, blending the man-made mound seamlessly back into the natural contours of the mountain. Finally, it would create a psychological deterrent, the ground itself appearing to have reburied the emperor in an act of divine or natural will. The very instability of the lowest hills, a constant challenge, could have been turned into the ultimate security system. While we may never know if this specific event occurred, the logic is compelling. The ancient Chinese viewed the landscape as a living force full of energy and intention. Aligning a tomb with sacred mountains and rivers was about harnessing that power for eternity. Causing a part of that mountain to slide and stand guard would be a final, profound act of geomancy, using the earth's own strength to complete the emperor's eternal rest. It transforms the tomb from a hidden chamber into something far more formidable, a secret locked not just by human hands, but by the deliberate collapse of a hillside. This idea of using a landslide as a deliberate protective curtain is a stark contrast to our next story, where the earth moved not to guard a secret, but to erase one entirely, swallowing a city not out of malice or design, but out of pure, tragic happenstance. The deliberate burial of an emperor's tomb is a calculated act, but nature's own calculations can be far more indiscriminate. everyone knows the story of Pompeii, frozen in volcanic ash by Mount Vesuvius. Its sister city, Herculaneum, was entombed in a different way by superheated mudflows. Yet there is a third act to this tragedy, often overlooked. The wealthy Roman resort of Stabiae did not simply receive a dusting of ash or a flood of mud. It was struck by something with the terrifying force of a landslide. When Vesuvius erupted on that fateful day in 79 of the Common Era, its final, most violent phase produced what volcanologists call pyroclastic flows. These are not slow rivers of lava, but avalanches of death, ground-hugging surges of searing hot gas, ash, and rock that can race down a mountain at hundreds of kilometers per hour. Geologically, they behave with the devastating momentum of the most catastrophic landslide imaginable, but superheated to over 400 degrees Celsius. Stabiae, perched on a cliff overlooking the Bay of Naples about 16 kilometers from the volcano, lay directly in the path of these flows. The first surge likely swept over the town in a matter of seconds. It was not a gentle burial, but a violent, scorching impact that collapsed roofs, shattered walls, and instantly killed every living thing. The hot material then settled and hardened, encasing the city in a thick, concrete-like layer. This is why Stabiae represents a uniquely brutal form of earth movement burial, a hot landslide that didn't just cover a city, it cooked and crushed it in a single, fiery instant. What makes Stabiae so poignant is the life it preserved in that moment of annihilation. This was no bustling commercial center, but a playground for Rome's ultra-wealthy elite. The villas unearthed here, like the Villa Ariana and the Villa San Marco, are monuments to luxury on an almost unimaginable scale. Archaeologists have found sprawling complexes with private bath suites, enormous dining rooms designed for lavish parties, and libraries that spoke of refined taste. The walls were adorned with breathtaking frescoes, scenes of mythology and gardens so vivid they seemed to breathe. Wide verandas and panoramic porticos were built specifically to capture the stunning sea views. These were not just homes, they were statements of power and pleasure, places where the Roman aristocracy came to escape the grime of the city and indulge in the beauty of the coast. The pyroclastic flow that destroyed Stabiae did not discriminate between a slave's quarters and a senator's bedroom. It sealed it all with equal, terrible finality. For centuries, Stabiae lay forgotten under its hardened blanket, its memory fading while Pompeii captured the world's imagination. It wasn't until the 18th century that systematic excavations began, revealing a snapshot of elite Roman leisure, abruptly and horribly interrupted. The story of Stabiae forces us to expand our definition of a landslide burial. It wasn't just earth and rock that fell here, but the entire furious energy of the volcano, moving as a fluid wall of destruction. It reminds us that the same geologic forces that build fertile plains and dramatic coastlines can, in an instant, become the instrument of a civilization's erasure, leaving behind only silent villas filled with ghosts and gorgeous art. The fiery burial of Stabiae shows nature's most violent temper, but Earth can also drown a landscape in a slower, colder embrace. In 2006, in the Sidoarjo region of East Java, Indonesia, the ground began to weep hot mud. What started as a small, bubbling seep near a gas drilling site soon became an unstoppable deluge. The Lucy mud volcano erupted not with lava, but with a torrent of slurry, burying entire villages, factories, and highways under meters of thick, gray sludge. Over a decade later, it still oozes, having displaced tens of thousands of people and creating a stark, alien wasteland. This modern disaster is not just a tragedy, it is a living laboratory. It shows us exactly how a mud volcano or a sediment landslide can operate, not as a single crash, but as a relentless, creeping tide that swallows everything in its path for years. Lucy gives a face to a geological process that, in the ancient past, would have been utterly inexplicable and absolutely devastating. It forces us to ask how many forgotten Neolithic villages might lie beneath similar, silent fields of dried mud. To find potential answers, we look to regions where the Earth has long been restless. Places like central Anatolia in Turkey or the Absheron Peninsula in Azerbaijan are dotted with ancient mud volcanoes, some still active today. These areas were also cradles of early human civilization, where some of the world's first farmers built permanent settlements. The geology here is a layered cake of water, clay, oil, and gas trapped under pressure. A trigger is all it takes. A strong earthquake, for instance, can fracture the seals. Suddenly, the pressurized mixture of water, sediment, and hydrocarbons forces its way to the surface, erupting not with fire, but with a cold, viscous flood. Imagine a Neolithic community at dawn. They feel a tremor, a common enough event, but then a new sound begins, a deep gurgling from a nearby hillside. A fissure opens and a foul-smelling, grey slurry starts pouring out. It is not fast like a lava flow, but it is inexorable. It fills the valley inch by inch, day by day. Their fields of emmer wheat are swallowed first. The mud, cooler than volcanic lava but still warm from the earth's depths, oozes against the mud brick walls of their homes. They might have days or even weeks to flee, grabbing what they can, but their world is being methodically erased. The mud hardens like concrete, sealing their tools, their hearths, their very footprints under an impermeable layer. Over centuries, wind-blown soil covers the site, and all memory of the village fades. Archaeologists centuries later would find only a strange, homogeneous layer of sediment, perhaps misinterpreting it as a simple flood deposit. Without the context of a modern Lucy, they might never consider that the entire settlement was the victim of a slow-motion landslide from below. Several Neolithic sites in these volatile regions show evidence of abrupt abandonment followed by rapid sedimentation. While not definitively proven to be mud volcano events, the possibility is a powerful new lens. It suggests that some of humanity's earliest experiments in settled life may have been terminated not by war or drought, but by the ground literally turning to soup beneath them. This transforms our understanding of ancient risk. A community's greatest threat could have risen silently from the earth itself, a cold, creeping burial that left no survivors to tell the tale. The creeping mud of forgotten villages shows a landscape turning against its inhabitants. But for one of the world's first great urban civilizations, the threat arrived with the water they so meticulously mastered. On a remote island in the salt flats of modern Gujarat, the ruins of Dolavera stand as a monument to both human genius and nature's indifference. This was not a minor settlement, but one of the 5 largest cities of the Indus Valley civilization, a metropolis that thrived for over 1,500 years. Its people built not with mud brick alone, but with finely dressed stone, constructing massive fortifications, ceremonial grounds, and an underground wonder, a water management system of breathtaking complexity. They channeled every drop of monsoon rain through a network of dams, canals, and reservoirs, some cut deep into the living rock, storing millions of liters of fresh water to survive the punishing dry seasons. This engineering was their lifeline, the very reason they could flourish on an arid island, and it may have been the stage for their final act. The decline of Dolavera and the wider Indus Valley civilization is a puzzle with many pieces. A prolonged drought, a shifting monsoon pattern, is the primary suspect, slowly choking the agricultural heartland. But at Dolavera, the end may have been more dramatic, a geological betrayal that struck at the city's engineered heart. The city was situated between 2 seasonal rivers, the Mansar and the Manhar. Its entire existence depended on capturing and controlling their flow. Geological studies of the region suggest a catastrophic event in its later centuries. Evidence points to a period of massive, perhaps unprecedented flooding. One compelling theory suggests this was not just heavy rain. A major seismic event in the nearby hills could have triggered enormous landslides, dumping colossal amounts of earth and rock into the river channels. Imagine the result. The rivers, blocked by sudden earthen dams, would have burst their banks with catastrophic force, scouring the landscape. but the more insidious damage came after the floodwaters receded. The landslides and silt would have permanently altered the local hydrology, the very way water moved across the land. The rivers might have been diverted entirely, carving new channels away from D'Oliveira's carefully constructed dams and intake systems. The city's brilliant reservoirs, designed for a specific, reliable flow, were left literally high and dry. Their sophisticated system was rendered useless not by a lack of water, but by the water finding a new path, a path that bypassed them completely. This is a profound irony. The very geological forces that brought them water and fertile silt in the first place, through the natural flooding of the rivers, ultimately turned destructive. The earth moved, the rivers abandoned their courses, and the city's technological marvel became a skeleton of empty stone tanks. The people of D'Oliveira likely fought back, trying to adapt their channels and dredge their reservoirs, but they were engineers, not geologists battling continental forces. The combination of a changing climate and this localized hydraulic catastrophe would have been a death blow. The population likely dwindled, retreating from the grand lower town to the citadel, and then, finally, the silence fell. D'Oliveira's story is a haunting lesson in fragile interdependence. It shows that a civilization can build a fortress against drought, only to be defeated by the earth itself rearranging the plumbing. Their greatest achievement became their point of greatest vulnerability, a reminder that when the ground decides to move, it can cut off the future as easily as it once provided for it. The silent, hardened mud of a forgotten village is one thing, but to be buried by a mountain itself is a fate of biblical scale. High in the Peruvian Andes, where clouds cling to jagged peaks, the ancestors of the Inca built remarkable cultures long before the empire rose. Among them were the Riquay, a people who mastered these harsh slopes around 2,000 years ago. They carved fortresses from stone and sculpted intricate pottery, but their greatest achievement was the land itself. They transformed sheer mountainsides into vast steppe terraces, creating fertile farmland where none should exist. Their civilization was a delicate, monumental balance with the vertical world. Then, from the highest point of their universe, the balance was shattered. Geological evidence tells a story of a cataclysm so vast it reads like myth. On peaks like Mount Huascaron, the roof of the Andes, a section of the mountain simply failed. The trigger was likely a massive earthquake, a common event in this colliding tectonic landscape. But this quake did more than shake the ground. It caused a flank of the mountain to detach. This was not a simple landslide of soil. It was a rock avalanche, a catastrophic collapse of billions of tons of granite and ice. The mass plummeted down the slopes, accelerating to terrifying speeds, pulverizing everything in its path into a fluidized wave of debris that could cross entire valleys and climb opposing hillsides. In moments, it buried the cultivated valleys below under tens of meters of chaotic, house-sized boulders and fine gray powder. At archaeological sites linked to the Riquay and earlier cultures, the evidence is stark and unambiguous. Excavations reveal beautifully constructed stone foundations, fragments of distinctive pottery, and the remnants of daily life, all abruptly capped by a thick, distinct layer of angular, unweathered rock fragments suspended in crushed sediment. This is not a flood deposit or a gradual accumulation. It is a geological signature of instantaneous, violent burial. The terraced fields, the lifeblood of these communities, were not just covered, they were utterly annihilated, ripped from the bedrock and mixed into the catastrophic slurry. The scale of such an event is almost beyond human comprehension. It would have erased not just a village but an entire valley system, a complete ecological and agricultural zone. The survivors, if there were any, would have faced a world rendered unrecognizable. Their fertile land was now a barren, impassable field of boulders. Their water sources were diverted or buried. The cultural and economic heart of their society was literally gone, swallowed by the mountain they revered. Such a trauma does not simply require rebuilding, it demands a complete reimagining of existence. For a pre-industrial society, the loss of that agricultural base was an existential threat. Populations would have scattered, migrating to distant kin or descending to lower, already occupied valleys, potentially sparking conflict. The knowledge of terrace engineering, of specific rituals tied to those mountain springs, of generations of history anchored to that place, would have dissolved within a generation. This kind of geological catastrophe provides a compelling, non-human explanation for the sudden abandonment of sophisticated highland sites and the mysterious decline of cultures like the Rockslide. Their story is a humbling reminder that human ingenuity, no matter how impressive, operates on a stage set by forces of unimaginable power. We can carve steps into a mountain, but we cannot stop the mountain from deciding to fall. The Andes remind us that mountains are not permanent, but in the Himalayas, this truth reaches a scale that defies the imagination. Here, the collision of continents is an ongoing event, pushing the highest peaks on Earth a few centimeters higher each year and storing catastrophic energy in every slope. The result is a landscape primed for landslides of almost mythical proportions, where the Earth does not just bury a village, it rewrites the course of history by choking the mightiest rivers on the planet. In the deep gorges of the Indus, the Brahmaputra, and the Sutlej, geology performs a terrifying cycle. An earthquake or a period of intense rain destabilizes an entire mountainside. Billions of tons of rock and ice crash into the narrow river channel below, creating a sudden, monstrous dam hundreds of meters high. The river, a roaring force that carved the canyon over millennia, is silenced in an instant. Upstream, the water begins to pool. What was a rushing gorge becomes a placid, rising lake, drowning valleys and any human settlements along its banks. These communities face a slow, creeping doom as the water inches toward their homes, a disaster with a pace measured in days or weeks, leaving them with a terrible choice: abandon generations of history or drown. But the true cataclysm is still to come. These landslide dams, piles of loose rubble, are incredibly fragile. The pressure of the rising lake water inevitably finds a weakness. The dam begins to leak, then erode, and then, without warning, it breaches. The entire lake, a colossal reservoir held back by a plug of earth, empties in a matter of hours. This generates a downstream flood of biblical force, a wall of water, mud, and boulders that scours the river valley clean for hundreds of kilometers. Every town, every temple, every farm in its path is utterly erased, the land stripped down to bare bedrock. This cycle is not a rare event, but a recurring geological heartbeat in the Himalayas. Modern studies have identified the remnants of countless ancient landslide dams, and we have witnessed the process in recent history. In 1929, a massive earthquake triggered a landslide on the Indus River, creating a lake over 50 kilometers long. When it burst months later, the floodwave was recorded over 400 kilometers downstream. In 2015, a landslide dammed the Sunkoshi River in Nepal, creating a crisis that required frantic engineering to drain safely. These modern events are tiny echoes of prehistoric cataclysms. Geologists have found evidence of a landslide dam on the Brahmaputra in the Tsangpo Gorge, so large that it created a lake stretching for hundreds of kilometers, drowning an area the size of a small country before it failed. The human cost of such an event in antiquity is almost unthinkable. An entire cultural region upstream would have been slowly inundated, its people scattered. Then the apocalyptic flood downstream would have wiped the slate clean for the next civilization, burying all evidence under meters of sterile sediment. It is impossible not to connect this relentless geological cycle to the profound flood myths that saturate Himalayan and South Asian folklore. From the ancient Indian story of Manu, warned by a fish to build a boat to survive a world-engulfing deluge, to the myriad tales in Tibetan and Nepali traditions of great waters sent to cleanse the world of corruption, the stories are universal. They were not mere fables, they were the cultural memory of real events passed down over countless generations. The survivors of such a flood, those who lived on high ground untouched by the waters, would have seen a world remade. The river valley they knew, with its familiar bends and settlements, was gone, replaced by a raw, scarred landscape of mud and rock. Their oral history would have encoded this trauma into a story of divine judgment and rebirth, a myth explaining why the old world ended and a new one had to begin. These Himalayan landslide dams show us that a civilization can be buried twice, first by the rising waters of a trapped river, and then by the collective amnesia that follows, where only the echo of the flood remains, transformed into legend. But beneath the calm surface of the Mediterranean, another city slept for millennia, one whose streets are older than the tales of Troy. Off the coast of southern Laconia in Greece, the ruins of Pavloptri lie in just a few meters of crystal-clear water, a ghostly blueprint of a Bronze Age world. Dating back over 5,000 years, this is the oldest known submerged city on Earth, a thriving port town that witnessed the dawn of Mycenaean civilization. While the slow creep of global sea level rise since the last ice age certainly contributed to its fate, the story of Pavloptri's drowning is more dramatic than a gentle inundation. This coastline is a seismic hotspot where the African tectonic plate grinds against the Eurasian plate. Major earthquakes here do not just shake the ground, they can literally drop it. Geological studies suggest that a series of powerful quakes, possibly around 1000 before the Common Era, triggered catastrophic coastal landslides. The very ground beneath Pavloptri likely liquefied and slumped, causing entire sections of the coastline to subside rapidly. In a series of violent events, the city was not so much flooded as it was dropped, its foundations sinking beneath the waves as the shoreline collapsed around it. This combination of tectonic subsidence and localized landslides offers a more complete and more terrifying explanation for its disappearance than sea level rise alone. What makes Pavloptri so extraordinary is its state of preservation. The water protected it from later rebuilding, plowing, and erosion that destroyed most terrestrial sites. From above, the layout is breathtakingly clear. You can see the entire street grid, with main thoroughfares and smaller alleys still defining the neighborhoods. The foundations of buildings, from simple homes to what appears to be a central palace or administrative complex, stand exactly where they were built. Courtyards, tombs cut into the bedrock, and even the ruts left by cartwheels 5 millennia ago are frozen in time. This underwater snapshot is a priceless archaeological map. It shows a sophisticated, pre-classical urban plan that challenges our assumptions about early Greek society. The presence of a large central building suggests organized governance, while the clear differentiation between residential and possible industrial areas points to social stratification and specialized labor. For archaeologists, Pavloptri is more than a single lost city. It is a key to understanding a wider pattern of loss. The Mediterranean coastline is dotted with legends of sunken towns and harbors. Pavloptri provides a tangible model for how many of them might have met their end, not through a slow, inevitable drowning, but through sudden, earthquake-induced collapse. It tells us that when we look at a quiet coastal village today, we might be standing on the edge of a geological cliffhanger, with the ruins of another Pavloptri lying just offshore, waiting for the next shift in the earth to reveal its secrets. The clear waters of the Mediterranean hide one kind of secret, but the deep, cold lakes of the Alps conceal another. Here, along the shores of lakes like Constance and Neuchâtel, lie the ghostly footprints of a lost Europe. For over 6,000 years, from roughly 5,000 to 500 before the Common Era, communities built their homes not on solid ground but on stilts right over the water. These were not simple huts, but sophisticated villages of timber and thatch, connected by wooden walkways where families lived, farmed, and fished. Their choice was strategic, placing them above predators and enemies with easy access to water and fertile lake-edge soils. Yet this proximity to the water also placed them directly in the path of a silent, sudden killer from the mountains above. The end for many of these villages did not come from war or gradual abandonment. Underwater archaeologists diving into these lakes have uncovered a startling truth. The sediment layers beneath the lake mud tell a story of catastrophe. Interwoven with the everyday debris of life, broken pottery and food scraps, they find thick, chaotic bands of gravel, sand and clay. These are not normal lake deposits. They are the unmistakable signature of massive hillslope collapses, catastrophic rockfalls and mudflows that roared down from the alpine valleys and plunged into the lakes. Imagine a tranquil morning shattered by a distant rumble that grows into a thunderous roar. A wall of mud, trees and boulders, triggered by a torrential rainstorm or an earthquake, explodes into the far end of the lake. The impact sends a tsunami racing across the water, a wave that would have smashed directly into the stilt villages. But the real burial came next. The immense slurry of debris settled through the water column, raining down on the sunken wreckage of the homes. In a single event, an entire village was smothered under meters of this protective sediment, sealed in a cold, dark, oxygen-free tomb. This violent burial, however, had an extraordinary side effect. It created a time capsule of unparalleled preservation. The lack of oxygen in the deep lake sediments halted decay. Wooden posts, tools, and intricate baskets that would have rotted away on land in a single generation survived for millennia. Archaeologists have recovered fabrics woven from flax and nettle fiber, with colors and patterns still visible. They have found butter still in its wooden container, and entire meals of grains and berries left on a hearth. A wooden wheel, one of the oldest ever found in Europe, was pulled from the muck, its design revealing a society with advanced carpentry and transport needs. Each of these sediment layers represents a specific disaster, a moment when the mountain fell and a community vanished. By dating the wood from the destroyed houses and the organic material in the mudflow, scientists can pinpoint these catastrophic events across centuries. They reveal a pattern, a rhythm of destruction where thriving settlements were periodically erased by the very landscape that sustained them. The people would rebuild, often on the same spot, only for a later generation to face the same fate. These alpine lake dwellings show us that a landslide's power is not just in its force, but in its preservative embrace. It captures a snapshot of ordinary life in the European Bronze Age with a clarity that no dry land site ever could, all because a hillside gave way and chose, quite by accident, to save what it destroyed. While the alpine lakes preserved villages in cold mud, the desert offers a different kind of tomb, one carved from living rock. Far from the fame of Petra, its sister city Hegra, also known as Madain Sale, stands in the silent desert of northwestern Saudi Arabia. This was a vital Nabatean outpost, a caravan station where traders rested and resupplied on the long journey across the arid peninsula. The Nabateans were masters of survival in this brutal environment, and at Hegra, their genius is etched into the landscape itself. They selected a site within a network of sandstone canyons and mesas, a natural fortress that provided shade and defense. Here, they sculpted over 100 monumental tombs directly into the cliff faces, their ornate facades echoing the grander ones at Petra. But their true masterpiece was invisible, a hidden web of water management. They built dams to capture rare rainfall, carved channels to direct every precious drop, and dug deep wells to tap underground reserves. This hydraulic system was the city's beating heart, allowing it to bloom in a place where water was more valuable than the spices carried by the caravans. Yet this very location, chosen for its protective cliffs, held a hidden geological threat. The desert here is not a flat, endless sea of sand. It is a landscape of dramatic elevation changes, of dry canyons known as wadis that wait, silent and empty, for years. When the rare, violent rainstorms do come, they are catastrophic. Torrents of water roar down these barren wadis with shocking speed, but they do not come alone. The flash floods rip through the loose sediment and scree that line the canyon walls, gathering up a thick, churning slurry of mud, rocks and debris. This transforms from a flood into a debris flow, a liquid landslide of terrifying power that behaves more like concrete than water. For Hegra, nestled in and around these wadis, such an event would have been a direct assault on its lifeline. A major debris flow would have done more than just flood the streets temporarily. It would have scoured the landscape, ripping apart the carefully constructed diversion dams and silt-filled channels that were the cornerstone of Nabatean water capture. The intricate system, designed for gentle collection, could be obliterated by a single, violent pulse of mud and boulders. The tombs themselves, cut into the lower portions of the cliffs, were not immune. The force of debris-laden water could have undercut tomb entrances, collapsed decorative facades, or filled sacred chambers with meters of hardened sediment, literally sealing the dead within a second earthen coffin. The impact of such a geological disaster would ripple far beyond physical damage. Hegra's entire economy and reason for existence depended on reliably providing water to caravans. If its systems were crippled, its reputation as a reliable oasis would vanish. Traders would bypass it for safer routes, stripping the city of its wealth and purpose. While historians believe Hegra's decline was also tied to the Roman Empire's shift of trade routes to the sea, a series of devastating debris flows could have been the critical, weakening blow. It would have made an already marginal existence unsustainable, proving that even the most brilliant desert engineers could be undone by the canyon's rare, furious decision to move. The silent, majestic tombs of Hegra stand today not just as monuments to a lost culture, but as solemn sentinels facing the dry wadis, a testament to a civilization that mastered every challenge of the desert except the occasional, overwhelming rage of the earth itself. The desert's fury could isolate an oasis, but in the jungle, the very paths of power could be severed by the earth itself. Deep in the rainforests of Guatemala, the great Maya city of Tikal rose like a stone mountain above the canopy. Its towering temples were symbols of divine kingship, and its network of raised stone causeways called Sakbiab were the lifelines of an empire. These white roads stretched for kilometers through the dense jungle, connecting Tikal to distant allies, subject towns, and vital sources of goods like obsidian, salt, and jade. The city's geography, however, was a double-edged sword. Tikal was not built on a flat plain, but on a series of rugged limestone hills surrounded by steep escarpments and seasonal swamps. This elevated position provided defense and drainage, but it also made the city profoundly dependent on those engineered roads traversing unstable terrain. During the intense rainy seasons, these slopes were tested to their limit. The combination of torrential downpours and the root systems of giant trees could destabilize whole sections of hillside. A large-scale slope failure would have been a disaster of logistics, not just a local tragedy. Imagine one of the main causeways, a vital artery for trade and communication, suddenly buried under a wall of mud, trees, and limestone rubble. The blockage would not be a simple inconvenience. Repairing such a breach through miles of muddy, insect-ridden jungle without modern machinery would be a monumental task consuming weeks or months of labor. For a city of tens of thousands, the implications were immediate and severe. The flow of essential goods would slow to a trickle. Messengers carrying political decrees or military intelligence would be delayed or forced onto dangerous, roundabout paths. Allied rulers might interpret the silence as disrespect or weakness. The isolation would ripple through every aspect of Tikal's society. The king's authority was partly maintained by the visible, constant flow of tribute and commerce into the city center. If the roads were broken, that visible proof of economic power would vanish. Local farmers in outlying areas might find their own access to city markets cut off, leading to local food gluts and city shortages simultaneously. This kind of infrastructural collapse would have amplified every other stress during the tumultuous Maya classic collapse. While larger factors like prolonged drought, warfare, and political upheaval were at play, a series of landslides blocking key causeways could have been the critical multiplier. It would have turned manageable shortages into crises, delayed military responses to invasions, and fractured the fragile web of alliances that held the kingdom together. The city wouldn't be buried under the mud, but it would be entombed by something just as deadly: silence and scarcity. The very engineering that allowed Tikal to master the jungle could, in a season of exceptional rains, become its cage, proving that a civilization can be felled not only by what falls from the sky, but by what slides onto the road home. The jungle's silence could starve a city, but in the high, rocky heart of Anatolia, an empire was shaken apart from within its own walls. The Hittite Empire was a Bronze Age superpower, a rival to Egypt that commanded a vast network of vassal states from its formidable capital, Hattusa. Perched on a rugged plateau over 1,000 meters above sea level, the city was a masterpiece of defensive engineering, protected by concentric rings of monumental stone walls that snaked over the hills. Yet around 1200 before the Common Era, this mighty capital was completely abandoned, its people scattered, and its empire dissolved into a dark age. For decades, historians pointed to the mysterious sea peoples and internal rebellions as the cause of this collapse, but the stones of Hattusa itself tell a different, more violent story. This was not simply a city conquered, it was a city broken. Geological evidence now suggests that Hattusa was struck by a series of devastating earthquakes, events so powerful they turned its greatest strength, its mountainous location, into a weapon of self-destruction. The city was built directly beneath towering limestone cliffs, a natural rampart that formed part of its defenses. When a major quake struck, those cliffs did not stand guard, they fell. The earthquakes would have triggered catastrophic rock avalanches from the heights above, sending house-sized boulders crashing down onto the city below. The destruction would have been surgical and total. Sections of the famous walls, some over 8 meters thick, would have been smashed open like eggshells. Temples dedicated to the storm god, the Hittites' chief deity, would have been crushed under the rubble of their own sacred mountains. Most critically, the sophisticated water supply system, a network of underground clay pipes and cisterns vital for surviving sieges and dry seasons, would have been shattered beyond immediate repair. In a single event, the city became indefensible, spiritually desecrated, and mortally thirsty. Imagine the aftermath. The dust settles to reveal a capital in ruins, not from enemy battering rams, but from the sky itself falling in. The psychological blow would have been as profound as the physical one. For a civilization whose king was the chief priest of the storm god, an earthquake and the resulting landslides would have been seen as the god's ultimate abandonment, a divine revocation of their right to rule. Survivors would have faced an impossible task. Clearing the monumental rubble alone without modern machinery would take years. Rebuilding the water system would require a stability the ground could no longer promise. And with the walls breached, the city lay open to any opportunistic raider or former vassal smelling weakness. The archaeological record at Hattusa shows signs of a rapid, unplanned departure. In some buildings, valuable items were left behind, suggesting people fled and did not return. There is no widespread layer of ash from a great burning, just the heavy silence of a place that became a geological trap. This theory does not discount the role of invasion or social unrest, but it reorders the sequence of disaster. The earthquakes and landslides likely came first, delivering a crippling, demoralizing blow that shattered the empire's central nervous system. The Hittite state, already strained by famine and the movements of other peoples, could not withstand this internal cataclysm. The capital was not taken, it was simply rendered a tomb of its own grandeur, proving that even the most imposing fortifications are useless when the mountains they are built upon decide to reclaim their stone. The mountains that guarded the Hittites became their executioners, a betrayal written in fallen stone. But in the serene, deep-cut fjords of Norway, the relationship between people and peaks held a different, more quietly terrifying intimacy. Here, villages clung to narrow strips of fertile land between the steep slopes and the cold, still water, a life of breathtaking beauty shadowed by a geological spectre. For centuries, the silent cliffs were neighbors, not threats. Yet evidence is emerging that some of these fjords hold secrets of sudden, apocalyptic violence, where the mountain did not just fall, but used the sea as its weapon. The danger lies in the unique geometry of a fjord itself. These are not wide, open bays, but deep, steep-walled canyons flooded by the sea. When a massive section of a mountainside, weakened by frost or an earthquake, finally gives way, billions of tons of rock plunge directly into the deep, confined water. The impact is not a simple splash. It is a catastrophic displacement event. The rock mass pushes a colossal volume of water out of its way, generating a tsunami within the fjord's narrow walls. Unlike an ocean tsunami that can lose energy over vast distances, a fjord tsunami has nowhere to go. The wave is funneled, focused, and amplified as it races down the long, straight channel. By the time it reaches a settlement miles away, it can be a wall of water 30, 50, even 100 meters high, traveling at highway speeds. The effect on a coastline is not flooding, it is scouring. The wave does not gently rise, it strikes with the force of a liquid bulldozer, ripping soil from bedrock, tearing ancient trees from their roots, and sweeping every structure, boat, and person into the churning chaos. The land is left raw and bare, as if sand-blasted clean. For archaeologists, this presents a haunting puzzle. How do you find a village that was not buried under mud but utterly erased from the map? The clues are subtle. In some fjords, scientists have identified anomalous layers of sand and gravel high up on slopes far above the current shoreline, deposits that could only have been laid down by a tremendous wave. In other areas, they find a strange absence where the expected layers of Viking-era settlement debris are simply missing from the geological record, replaced by a sterile band of clean sediment. It suggests that entire communities, their longhouses, their docks, their very history, were washed away in a single, terrible morning, leaving no survivors to record the event in saga or song. We do not have to rely solely on ancient evidence to understand this horror. In the early hours of April 7, 1934, the modern village of Tafjord learned the reality firsthand. 3 million cubic meters of rock broke from the mountain of Langhamaran and crashed into the Tafjorden. The resulting wave, estimated at over 60 meters high, shot down the fjord. It struck the villages of Tafjord and Efjora minutes later with devastating force. 40 people were killed, and entire clusters of homes were reduced to matchsticks. The Tafjord disaster was a tragic, modern-scale demonstration of a process that, with larger rockfalls in the deeper past, could have been orders of magnitude worse. It proves the mechanism is not theoretical, but a recurring fact of life in this landscape. This forces us to re-examine the Norse sagas and settlement patterns with new eyes. Stories of coastal farms cursed or abandoned might not be folklore, but faded memories of real places that simply ceased to exist one day. The quiet, abandoned beaches at the head of certain fjords may not be signs of poor land, but of land that was made permanently inhospitable by a wave that cleaned it down to the granite. The fjords, for all their serene majesty, are geological theaters where the collapse of a cliff can write a final, abrupt act for any civilization nestled on their shores. This chilling interplay of rock and water finds a parallel in a very different climate, where the Earth's collapse was not into water, but into a substance far more precious and far more treacherous. The fjords teach us that water can magnify a landslide's reach, but in the lush highlands of Mesoamerica, a civilization's own success wrote the recipe for its monument's burial. At Capon, in modern-day Honduras, the Maya created one of their most exquisite city-states, a center of art, astronomy, and dynasty known for its breathtaking stone sculptures and hieroglyphic stairways. Yet beneath the grandeur, archaeologists have uncovered a slower, quieter catastrophe. excavations around the city's periphery have revealed something startling: entire earlier phases of construction, including temples and platforms, were found deliberately buried under meters of earth and stone by the Maya themselves. This was not an act of reverence but of desperate practicality. The layers of soil covering these structures are not ordinary dirt. They are colluvium, a technical term for hill wash, the sediment that slowly creeps and slides down a slope after being loosened from above. For centuries, the Maya of Capon transformed their landscape to support a booming population. They cleared forests on the steep hillsides surrounding the valley to plant maize, beans, and squash. They cut timber for construction and fuel. This deforestation, while necessary for survival, stripped the land of its natural anchor. Tree roots that once held the soil tightly in place were gone. When the heavy seasonal rains arrived, they pounded the exposed slopes. Without the root network to absorb the water and bind the earth, the topsoil simply washed away. This erosion created a cascading problem. Fertile soil from the hillsides washed down into the valley, silting up agricultural terraces and waterways. But more ominously, the denuded slopes became unstable. The earth, now waterlogged and loose, began to move in small, gradual landslides or in sudden slumps after a major storm. This hill wash, this colluvium, flowed downhill with the rain, accumulating at the base of the slopes, right where the Maya had built their expanding city. The Maya response to this creeping disaster was ingenious and labor-intensive. They would not abandon their sacred center. Instead, they engaged in a constant, cyclical battle with the very land they depended on. When a valuable structure at the edge of the city was threatened or partially buried by hill wash, they did not simply dig it out. They would perform a monumental act of landscaping. They would gather this same erosional debris, the colluvium, and use it to intentionally and completely entomb the older building. They would then cap this artificial hill with a new layer of stone and plaster, creating a stable, level platform. On top of this new, human-made plateau, they would construct a brand new temple or palace, each generation building literally on the buried achievements of the last. At Capon, this process created a layered history, like pages in a book, where earlier chapters are physically sealed beneath later ones. This tells a profound story of a society caught in a feedback loop of its own making. Their agricultural and architectural success led to deforestation. Deforestation triggered erosion and landslides. The resulting hill wash then threatened their architecture, forcing them to use that same destructive material to bury and rebuild their own city. It was a brilliant, draining adaptation, a testament to Maya engineering and resilience, but it also highlights a vulnerable dependence. The entire cycle was fueled by an ever-increasing demand for food and space from a growing population. One has to wonder, looking at the deeply layered acropolis of Capon, how much energy was diverted from art, astronomy, or governance into the endless, back-breaking work of holding back the sliding hills. Each buried temple is not just a time capsule, it is a monument to a civilization's struggle against the ecological consequences of its own prosperity, a reminder that sometimes the earth that buries you is the very soil you ask to feed you. The constant, silent battle against a sliding hillside reveals a civilization's intimate struggle with the land it reshapes. But on the shores of the Caspian Sea, a different kind of slow-motion burial unfolded, one that erased not just a city, but an entire chapter of history. The Khazar Khaganate was a medieval powerhouse, a nomadic empire that converted to Judaism and held the balance of power between the Christian Byzantine Empire and the expanding Muslim caliphates. At the heart of this unique civilization was its legendary capital, Itil, described by Arab geographers as a sprawling, cosmopolitan city of brick and wood. Itil was said to straddle the mighty Volga River near its delta, a bustling hub of trade where Muslims, Christians, Jews, and pagans lived side by side under the rule of the Jewish Khagan. Yet, by the 12th century, Itil had vanished so completely that its very location became one of archaeology's most stubborn mysteries. How could a capital of an empire that dominated the steppes for centuries simply disappear without a trace? The answer likely lies not in war or conquest, but in the restless, unpredictable nature of the Caspian Sea itself. This vast inland sea is a geological anomaly, a closed basin with no outlet. Its water level is not stable like an ocean's, but a volatile pendulum swung by the delicate balance between river inflow and evaporation. Historical records and geological cores tell a story of dramatic, rapid fluctuations. Over centuries, the Caspian can rise or fall by several meters, dramatically redrawing its coastline for hundreds of miles. Itil was built on the soft, sedimentary plains of the Volga Delta, a landscape of silt, clay, and sand deposited by the river over millennia. This ground is fertile and easily worked, but it is also inherently unstable, especially when saturated with water. A rapidly rising Caspian would have done more than just inch closer to the city walls. The rising water table would have saturated the loose sediments upon which Itil was built, turning solid ground into a waterlogged, unstable slurry. This process, known as liquefaction, can cause the earth to lose its strength entirely. Buildings would have begun to tilt and sink unevenly into the soft mire, but the more catastrophic threat would have been coastal landslides, or more accurately, massive slumps and rotational failures of the saturated delta bluffs. As the sea rose, it would have undercut the shoreline, eating away at the base of the soft sediment cliffs. Without that support, entire sections of the coast, potentially bearing whole neighborhoods of the city, would have slumped into the advancing water in chaotic, muddy collapses. Imagine a city dying not by fire or sword, but by a slow, wet subsidence. Streets would flood with brackish water that never recedes. Wharves and warehouses would vanish beneath the waves as the shoreline retreats inland. Then, one stormy season, a large section of the riverbank, weakened from within, simply gives way, sliding into the murky water and taking a quarter of the city with it. The process would have been relentless. Over decades, perhaps a century, the rising sea and the collapsing land would have worked in tandem. The city's inhabitants would have fought a hopeless, soggy battle, rebuilding farther inland only to have the water follow. Eventually, the economic and psychological cost would have been too great. The capital of the Khazar Khaganate, its grand synagogue and bustling markets, would have been abandoned to the encroaching mud and water. The Caspian, having swallowed the city, did not keep it preserved. Its constant level changes and fierce storms would have churned the sediments, scattering bricks and timbers. Later, when the sea level fell again, it would have left not a recognizable ruin, but a vast, featureless plain of new sediment, burying the last remnants under meters of fresh silt. This explains why, despite decades of searching, no definitive trace of Itil has been found. There is no telltale mound, no concentration of rubble. The city is likely dispersed, its fragments churned and buried deep within the ever-shifting geography of the delta. The loss of Itil is more than the loss of a city. It is the loss of the physical heart of a pivotal empire. Without its capital to anchor our understanding, the Khazar Khaganate remains half in shadow, a civilization whose final act was not written in chronicles, but in the silent, drowning slump of a coastline, proving that sometimes the earth does not bury history with a crash, but with a slow, wet sigh. The slow drowning of Itil is a story of land surrendering to water, but on the most isolated inhabited island on Earth, a society faced a collapse written in the very soil beneath their feet. The iconic Moai statues of Easter Island, or Rapa Nui, stand as silent sentinels to one of history's most debated ecological tragedies. The common narrative is stark, a people who cut down every last palm tree to move their stone giants, triggering erosion, famine, and societal collapse. While this story of human-driven environmental overexploitation is central, it overlooks a powerful, accelerating force, the island's own volatile geology. Rapa Nui is not a stable platform. It is a volcanic island born from 3 main volcanoes, and its soil is a young, fragile layer of ash and weathered rock. This earth is incredibly fertile, but it is also desperately prone to slipping away. The island's original forest was more than just timber for rollers. It was a living geological anchor. The deep, tangled roots of the palm trees acted like a vast net, holding the precious topsoil firmly to the steep slopes of the volcanic craters and hillsides. When the last trees were felled, that net was ripped away. The island was left naked under the pounding rains and relentless winds of the South Pacific. What followed was not a gentle, uniform erosion. It was a pattern of catastrophic earth movements. Without roots to bind it, the saturated volcanic soil on hillsides would lose its cohesion. After heavy storms, entire sections of slope would give way in sudden, muddy landslides. These were not small events. A single slope failure could wipe out an entire community's cultivated garden plots in minutes, burying their sweet potato fields, their taro patches, and their banana plants under meters of sterile subsoil and rubble. Imagine a family's entire annual food supply, carefully tended, simply sliding down the hill into the sea. This geological instability would have attacked the society on multiple fronts. Beyond the immediate loss of food, these landslides would have also devastated the island's intricate system of manavai, the circular stone windbreaks used to protect young crops. More hauntingly, they may have even threatened the sacred sites themselves. Many ahu, the ceremonial platforms that support the moai, are built on coastal embankments. A major landslide triggered by a storm could have undermined an ahu, causing the platform to crack or collapse, toppling the revered ancestors it was meant to honor. For the Rapa Nui people, this would have been more than an agricultural disaster. It would have been a spiritual cataclysm, a sign that the mana, the spiritual power of the land and their ancestors, had abandoned them. The societal spiral becomes clearer when you add this geological accelerator. Deforestation led to soil instability. That instability caused landslides that destroyed farmland faster than it could be replenished. The resulting food shortages intensified competition and conflict between clans, a struggle vividly recorded in the obsidian spear points found across the later period. The population, already stressed, became acutely vulnerable. When European contact finally came in the 18th century, bringing new diseases, the Rapa Nui people had already been severely weakened by a century or more of internal strife and ecological geological turmoil. Their society was not just ecologically frail, it was geologically battered. The moai do not simply stare inland as guardians of a lost paradise. They stand on an island whose very skin betrayed its people, where the earth itself became an active participant in the collapse, sliding from beneath them just when they needed it to hold firm the most. The silent collapse of an island's soil is a slow tragedy, but a single storm can write a faster, more definitive ending. In the rugged hills of western Turkey, the ruins of the ancient city of Blondos tell a story of sudden, muddy oblivion. Founded as a Hellenistic fortress, Blondos later flourished under Roman rule, its citizens carving an extensive necropolis, a city of the dead, into the steep cliffs surrounding their settlement. These were not simple graves, but elaborate tomb chambers adorned with frescoes and filled with offerings for the afterlife, a testament to their wealth and belief in eternity. Yet, in many of these tombs, archaeologists made a chilling discovery. The doorways and interiors were not simply filled with dirt, they were packed with a distinct, thick layer of sediment, a chaotic mix of clay, silt, and rounded stones. This was not the gentle accumulation of centuries, it was the signature of a violent debris flow, a landslide of liquid earth that roared down from the hills above. The trigger was almost certainly a torrential rainstorm, one of those catastrophic cloudbursts that can hit Mediterranean landscapes. The dry hillsides, stripped of vegetation by grazing or agriculture, would have shed the water instantly. The runoff gathered force, picking up loose soil and rocks until it transformed into a churning river of mud, a debris flow with the consistency of wet concrete, moving fast enough to overtake a running person. This viscous tide would have poured through the natural gullies leading directly to the cliffside necropolis. It did not politely fill the tombs, it blasted into them, forcing its way through doorways and any crack or opening. Inside, it settled and hardened, sealing sarcophagi, burying funeral couches, and encasing delicate artifacts in an airtight, muddy coffin. For the living city above, the same event would have been a disaster of filth and destruction, burying streets and lower structures under a suffocating blanket. How would the survivors have understood such an event? In the ancient mindset where gods controlled the natural world, a catastrophe of this precision and violence was rarely seen as random. The debris flow specifically targeting the city of the dead would have been interpreted as a profound and terrifying omen. It would have been seen as divine punishment, perhaps for a ritual impurity, a broken vow to the gods of the underworld, or an offense by the entire community. The message seemed clear. The gods were not just displeased, they were desecrating the sacred bridge to the afterlife itself, trapping and imprisoning the spirits of the ancestors. This perception would have crippled the community's spiritual morale, creating a crisis of faith alongside the physical cleanup. The burial of Blondos's necropolis offers a starkly different preservation than a volcanic ash fall. The mud was cooler and less destructive, but its weight and plasticity could crush wooden objects and distort artifacts. Yet, by sealing the tombs so completely, it also protected them from looters and the elements for 2 millennia. Excavators painstakingly removing that hardened mud have revealed vibrant frescoes on the walls, scenes of mythological figures and floral designs whose colors remained startlingly bright, frozen in the moment the mud entombed them. This creates a poignant duality. The very force that was likely seen as a curse from the gods became the inadvertent guardian of the city's memory, preserving the art and objects that allow us to hear their story today. It is a reminder that in the ancient world, a landslide was never just geology. It was a message, and its meaning was carved from fear, faith, and the desperate human need to find reason in the chaos of a crumbling hill. Legends of sunken cities echo across the cold waters of Brittany, but none are as haunting as the tale of Wise. According to the myth, this was the most beautiful city in the world, protected from the sea by a massive dike and a single magical gate. The key to this gate was held by the king, but his treacherous daughter, Dahat, stole it during a night of revelry. She unlocked the gate for a mysterious lover, who was in truth the devil, and the sea rushed in, swallowing the sinful city whole as its bells told a final underwater lament. For centuries, this was a simple parable of vice and divine punishment. Yet beneath the folklore lies a geological truth as solid as the Breton cliffs. The coast of Brittany is a patchwork of ancient, unstable landscapes. In many low-lying areas, the ground is not solid rock, but deep layers of peat, a spongy, waterlogged accumulation of ancient vegetation. This terrain is deceptively firm when dry, but becomes a liquefied trap when saturated. A settlement like Wise, built on such ground for its proximity to rich fishing and fertile land, would have lived on borrowed time. A single trigger could have been its doom, perhaps a powerful Atlantic storm surge coinciding with a high tide and a period of heavy rain. The weight and vibration of the pounding waves could have liquefied the peaty foundation, causing a sudden, catastrophic subsidence. The land would not have simply flooded, it would have slumped and foundered, sliding beneath the rising water in a matter of hours. To the survivors watching from higher ground, the effect would have been supernatural, their city appearing to be actively pulled down, not merely covered by waves. The dike in the story is a crucial clue, a folk memory of human attempts to hold back the sea with early engineering. The lost key represents the failure of that system, a single point of vulnerability in the face of overwhelming natural force. The legend preserves the trauma with symbolic accuracy. transforming a complex geological collapse into a potent moral drama about a stolen key and a drowned princess. It is a perfect example of how the human mind processes incomprehensible disaster, encoding the terrifying reality of a sliding coastline into a story we can understand, a myth where the fault lies not with the unstable earth but with human folly. The legends of drowned cities find their ultimate truth not in myth, but in a single, staggering crack in the earth's crust. Far off the coast of Norway, beneath the cold, dark waters of the Norwegian Sea, lies the scar of the Storega slide. This was not a landslide, it was a continental collapse. Around 8,150 years ago, an area of seabed the size of Scotland simply gave way. 3,000 cubic kilometers of sediment, a volume of earth and rock 100 times greater than the largest landslide ever recorded on land, detached and plunged into the abyssal plain. The energy released was orders of magnitude beyond any earthquake in human memory. This submarine avalanche did more than rearrange the ocean floor. It displaced a colossal volume of water in an instant. The result was a tsunami of almost unimaginable scale, a wave that radiated out across the entire North Sea basin. For the Mesolithic hunter-gatherer communities living along the coasts of what are now Scotland, Norway, and Denmark, this was not a disaster, it was an apocalypse. Their world was one of rich coastal resources, of settlements built on low-lying plains and archipelagos that have long since vanished beneath the waves, places archaeologists call Doggerland. On that day, the sea did not rise slowly. Witnesses on a distant hill would have seen the water first recede dramatically, pulling back far beyond the lowest tide, stranding fish and revealing secrets of the seabed. Then the horizon would have darkened with a line that was not water but a wall, a surge of ocean dozens of meters high moving at terrifying speed. The wave would have struck the low-lying coasts with the force of a continent. It would have scoured islands clean, surging miles inland up river valleys and fjords, drowning every campsite, every fishing ground, every sacred place. Entire family groups, their knowledge, their stories, and their very genetic lineages would have been erased in a single saltwater breath. The archaeological record turns silent in its wake. Layers of sand and shell far inland, deposits of deep-sea diatoms found in ancient coastal peat bogs, all point to this catastrophic inundation. The tsunami likely delivered the final blow to the last remnants of Doggerland, the once vast plain connecting Britain to mainland Europe, finally sinking its remaining hills beneath the waves for good. This event would have reshaped the map of human survival in northern Europe. Survivors, those who were hunting in the highlands or inland forests, would have returned to a coastline rendered unrecognizable, their traditional territories gone, their kin vanished. The psychological and cultural trauma must have been profound, echoing down generations in oral tradition, perhaps forming the deep, primordial root of great flood myths that appear in cultures across the globe. The Storega slide stands as a humbling geological bookend to our journey. It reminds us that the scale of nature's power can dwarf even the greatest of human civilizations, for it can erase the very foundations of societies before they ever become civilizations. These 25 stories are not just about lost cities, they are about fragility. They show us that the ground beneath our feet, the cliffs that shelter us, the rivers that feed us are not permanent stages. They are active participants in our story, capable of both nurturing life and burying it in an instant. From the sunken ports of the ancient world to the drowned hunting grounds of the Stone Age, the message is written in stone, silt, and sand. Civilizations rise, but the earth always moves, and sometimes it moves to forget. From the primordial tsunami of Storega to the last mudslide at Blondos, a single, humbling truth emerges. Landslides were not rare anomalies in the ancient world. They were a frequent and terrifying engine of historical change, as common as war or drought in reshaping the human story. These 25 stories are bound by powerful, repeating threads. Time and again, we see societies drawn to geologically risky ground, lured by the very resources that made civilization possible. They built on unstable cliffs for defense, on river deltas for fertile soil, on volcanic slopes for rich farmland, and along coastlines for trade. Their genius lay in adapting to these landscapes, in carving terraces, digging wells, and constructing dikes. Yet their vulnerability was etched into those same foundations. The earth that fed them could, without warning, become their tomb. This is the core paradox of our history, a dance with geological forces whose rhythm we could never truly predict. Our ancestors' civilizations, for all their art and architecture, existed on a precipice, their permanence and illusion shattered by the next tremor, the next storm, the next mountain that decided to move. So we are left with a question that bridges past and present. As we look at our own modern megacities, many nestled in earthquake zones, built on reclaimed land, or clinging to eroding coastlines, are we truly any different? We have better technology and deeper knowledge, but the fundamental equation remains. We still cluster where the resources are, often in places the Earth considers temporary. The stories of Hittite, Thonis Heraclean, and the Langshan landslide are not just ancient history, they are cautionary tales written in stone and sediment. They remind us that human achievement is a fleeting spark against the slow, immense power of the planet. Which of these lost worlds speaks to you the most? Was it the everyday life frozen at Cerén, the mysterious drowned capital of the Khazars, or the legendary fury that buried Wise? Let us know in the comments below which civilization you would most want to see rise from the earth, and subscribe to keep unraveling the greatest mysteries of our past.